Official death records from Greene County, Ohio, list a man named Caesar Bowen as dying in 1888 at the incredible age of 126 years. Born in 1762, during the reign of King George III, Ohio was still an unmapped wilderness. But here's what makes historians uneasy. 7 notarized affidavits from prominent citizens claimed they'd known Caesar since their own childhoods, and each insisted he already seemed ancient back then. The county coroner, examining his body, noted dental wear and bone density that defied explanation, yet refused to dispute the age claim. For over a century, academics quietly dismissed the case, filing it away in archives too disturbing to confront. What they found in Caesar's cabin after his death: a staggering 63 journals, written in 3 distinct handwriting styles, all seemingly his own hints at something far more unsettling than mere longevity. Before we dive deeper into the impossible life of Caesar Bowen, I wanted to hear from you. If you're watching from Ohio or anywhere in the United States, drop your location in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell, because stories like Caesar's deserve to be remembered. Now, let me take you back to where this extraordinary mystery truly begins. Caesar Bowen was born in 1762, in a time when much of the land we now call Ohio was still wilderness, and the lives of people like him were meant to be erased. Born into slavery, Caesar's childhood was marked by fear, labor, and loss. He watched families torn apart, friends disappear, and the relentless cruelty of a system designed to strip him of identity, dignity, and hope. But Caesar survived. More than that, he remembered. Every story whispered in the quarters at night, every secret pain, every small victory. He carried them all within himself. He became a living archive of human suffering and resilience, a vessel for the memories of those whose voices might otherwise have been lost to history. This is the story not only of a man who lived an impossibly long life, but of the lives he preserved. In America, during the centuries of slavery, memory was a lifeline, a way to hold on when bodies were powerless. And for Caesar Bowen, memory became more than a lifeline, it became his purpose. As a child, Caesar was chosen for a ritual performed by a woman whose name was Amrachi. She had survived horrors herself, brought over on the Middle Passage, and had somehow retained knowledge, power, and a sense of something greater. She recognized something in young Caesar, a capacity to carry, to preserve, to witness, and performed a ceremony that would bind the stories of countless others to him. It was not magic, as we often imagine in fairy tales, but something that blurred the line between memory, consciousness, and human endurance. From that moment, Caesar was no longer simply a boy in slavery. He became a repository, a keeper of lives, experiences, and testimonies that the world sought to erase. Over the years, the burden he carried grew heavier. Every person whose story he absorbed added years to his life, stretching the limits of human longevity. And yet, with each added life, he came closer to a limit no one could have imagined. He was both man and archive, witness and vessel, memory and living history. By the time we meet him in his final years, Caesar Bowen is more than old, he is extraordinary. He has seen centuries unfold, carried the memories of hundreds of souls, and defied the natural limits of life itself. And yet, for all the mystery surrounding his age and his abilities, his story is not just about the impossible, it's about the enduring human spirit, about the ways we choose to remember, and the lengths one man went to ensure that suffering and resistance would never be forgotten. As a child, Caesar Bowen was small, curious, and afraid. He didn't understand why the elders in his community kept glancing at him with a mixture of fear and reverence. That is, until the day Amrachi chose him. Her name meant God's grace, and she carried the weight of generations' memories, knowledge, and secrets passed down from Africa. She had survived horrors most could not imagine: the Middle Passage, the loss of family, and the erasure of her people's languages and customs. Yet, she had kept something alive. Amrachi recognized something in Caesar, a vessel waiting to be filled, a consciousness capable of carrying what should have been lost. She didn't promise him immortality. She didn't promise him wealth or power. What she did promise, through a ritual older than the lands that now called themselves America, was purpose. She whispered incantations in a language that seemed to bend the air, traced symbols on the earth, and surrounded young Caesar with objects she said contained the essence of memory itself: shells, carved beads, dried herbs, and water from a river in a distant homeland. The boy didn't understand. He struggled to comprehend why his small hands were being marked, why the ceremony made his heart pound and his vision blur. His young mind filled with fear and awe. "Why me?" he whispered, tears on his cheeks. Amarachi only smiled, a small, sad smile. "Because you can remember," she said. "Because you will hold the stories no one else can." What happened next, Caesar would carry for the rest of his life. The ritual imbued him with something both miraculous and terrifying: the ability to absorb memory. Every life, every struggle, every voice that might vanish from the world could now live on in him. But there was a cost. With each memory absorbed, he felt the weight of human experience pressing down on his soul. Pain, sorrow, injustice, fleeting moments of joy, all of it became his own. Visualize. For a moment, the scene: a small cabin, candlelight flickering across faint African motifs painted on the walls, the smell of herbs and smoke filling the air. Young Caesar kneels, trembling, as Amarachi chants. The rhythm of her voice matches the beating of his heart. Outside, the world continues its cruelty, slavery, loss, the relentless passage of time, but inside, something extraordinary is taking place. From that day, Caesar was no longer just a boy. He was a vessel, a repository, and with that role came a burden unlike any other. He could feel the lives he carried pressing against the edges of his mind. Some were full of joy, others full of terror, but all were vivid, alive, impossible to ignore. And something else began to change. His body, fragile and young, began to endure what should have been impossible. Hours stretched into days, days into years, and yet he remained. The human limits of age and decay seemed to bend around him. The more he remembered, the more he persisted. It was as if memory itself had the power to prolong life, to anchor him to the world even as it passed countless others by. Caesar never spoke of the ritual to anyone outside Amarachi's care. How could he? Who would believe a child who had been imbued with centuries of memory? And so, for decades, the secret remained buried in the quiet corners of his mind, shaping the man he would become, and laying the foundation for the impossible life that historians would later struggle to explain. He learned, slowly, that memory is not just a passive thing. It shapes who we are. It can be heavy, suffocating, even painful, but it can also preserve beauty, wisdom, and truth that would otherwise be lost. For Caesar Bowen, it became both a gift and a curse. And this is only the beginning of the journey that would take him from a small, frightened boy to a man whose life would defy reason itself. As Caesar grew older, something extraordinary and terrifying began to take hold. It wasn't just his age-defying logic. It was the way his mind seemed to fracture and expand all at once. You see, every life he carried within him left an imprint. Every memory, every voice, every emotion became a part of him. And as the decades passed, the boundaries between Caesar and the lives he held began to blur. Imagine walking into a room and hearing a man speak, then a child, then a woman, all from the same body. That was Caesar. One moment, he would recall a tale of a plantation in Georgia, recounting the dialect of its enslaved workers so perfectly it was uncanny. The next, he would shift to a voice heavy with the tones of Maryland, retelling a grief-stricken widow's tragedy, her sorrow vibrating through his words. Sometimes he spoke in languages no one could identify, tongues carried across oceans and centuries. Now alive in a man who had never left Ohio. Dr. Jonathan Sutton, a physician and amateur ethnographer who first met Caesar in the 1860s, documented what he could, but even he struggled. He wrote in meticulous detail, noting that Caesar's speech patterns, bone structure, and even facial expressions would subtly shift with each new voice. Sutton called it fragmentation of identity. He described the phenomenon as nothing he had ever seen in any patient before or since. It is as if the soul itself splinters, he wrote in his journal, and yet the body endures, carrying all fragments at once. Sound effects could help you hear what Caesar might have sounded like: a soft childlike giggle, followed by the rasp of a man hardened by labor, then a melodic cadence, almost African in origin. Each voice, each rhythm, is tied to a memory, a life preserved. And for Caesar, there was no pause, no relief. He could not forget. He could not release what he carried. Sometimes, the voices would overwhelm him. He would wander into the woods near his cabin, muttering in ways that made neighbors whisper about madness. A farmer passing by would see him sitting on a stump, speaking in a voice that was not his own, tears streaming down his weathered face. Children hiding in the cornfields swore he had thousands of eyes in his head, because his attention seemed to stretch across centuries, seeing all that had been and all that could have been. Yet Caesar retained something no one could explain: coherence. Despite the storm of identities inside him, he could choose which voices to let speak, which memories to hold to the surface, and which to bury for a moment. But the cost was psychological, and at times unbearable. Sleep became an elusive refuge. Dreams were crowded with lives not his own. He would awaken exhausted, the weight of centuries pressing down as if the world itself were resting on his chest. Dr. Sutton was both fascinated and horrified. He documented Caesar's behavior for years, taking careful notes of his speech patterns, his bone density, and the signs of aging or lack thereof. Sutton noted that Caesar's teeth, worn in impossible patterns, suggested someone far older than he appeared. His eyes, dark and penetrating, seemed to hold memories no human should possess. Sutton's writings make it clear he did not fully believe the man before him, yet he could not deny the evidence. Caesar was real. Caesar was extraordinary. And yet, for all the science and observation, Dr. Sutton could not explain the inner life of this man. He could not measure the psychic weight of hundreds of identities living simultaneously within a single human form. Imagine, for a moment, hearing the voice of your great-grandparent, your neighbor, a stranger who suffered injustice, all within your own thoughts simultaneously. This was Caesar's reality. Memory became both a gift and a cage. Visuals here could emphasize fragmentation, shadows splitting on the wall, echoes of different voices overlapping, Caesar's figure shifting subtly as if the very essence of time flowed through him. You might see him at a hearth, scribbling notes in journals with different handwriting styles, sometimes elegant, sometimes rushed, sometimes jagged as if three people were writing at once. And in those journals, the evidence of his life's burden emerges: lists of names, accounts of horrors witnessed, sketches of fleeting moments of beauty, all preserved because he could not allow them to vanish. There were times when neighbors and friends would sense the presence of others within him. A story tells of a visiting preacher who came to the cabin one cold winter evening. Caesar's voice shifted mid-sentence, reciting scripture in a dialect the preacher did not recognize, pausing to weep for a tragedy that had occurred hundreds of miles away decades earlier. The preacher reportedly left shaken, muttering that he had seen the weight of humanity incarnate in one man. And this is what makes Caesar's story so haunting. He was not only surviving, he was enduring everything that should have died with others. His body, defying time, was a vessel. His mind, splintered yet whole, was a library of human experience. And every new memory he absorbed added both to his wisdom and his torment. Each story carried joy, yes, but also grief, violence, loss, and sorrow beyond measure. By the time he reached his 40s, those around him, though unaware of the full truth, began to notice something uncanny. He seemed to know things he should not, recall faces he had never met, and respond to events as if he had lived them before. Children grew up under his gaze, and he would remember their every triumph and failure, sometimes recounting them in vivid detail years later. It was as if time itself bent around him, a slow, impossible curvature that defied all reason. Caesar Bowen carried history not as a scholar or writer but as a living, breathing embodiment of it. And the psychological strain of carrying hundreds of lives was only beginning. Because memory, as he had learned from Amarachi, is never neutral. It shapes the vessel that holds it. It can preserve, enlighten, and transform, but it can also fracture, overwhelm, and consume. And for Caesar, it would take decades to find balance, if such a thing was even possible. By the time Caesar reached his 50s, the fragmentation of his identity was no longer subtle. It had become a force, a living symphony of memories and voices that could not be contained. One night, in the dim light of his cabin, the phenomenon reached its peak. He began to speak not just one voice or two but dozens at once. English, African dialects, melodies long forgotten, and songs carried across oceans and centuries intertwined in a way that defied comprehension. Martha Huitt, a caretaker and neighbor who had known Caesar for years, was present that night. She had seen him shift voices before, but this was different. She whispered, almost to herself, "That's not natural," and she was right. It was as if the lives he carried were demanding to be heard, demanding acknowledgement, and he, and only he, could give them that voice. Imagine standing in a small, wooden cabin as the air vibrates with layered voices. Some were soft, sorrowful, others firm and commanding. They spoke in overlapping patterns, yet each was distinct, each conveying the weight of an entire life. You could hear the cadence of a child fleeing the fields of Georgia, the tones of a widow lamenting loss in Virginia, the rich, low hum of an elder recounting wisdom from Africa centuries ago. It was a chorus of human experience compressed into a single vessel. Caesar Bowen. Visuals could show flickering candlelight casting long shadows across the cabin walls. Papers scattered on a desk, some covered in multiple layers of handwriting, show evidence of attempts to record these overlapping identities. A faint breeze moves the curtains as if the room itself reacts to the voices, amplifying the feeling that something extraordinary is occurring, something beyond ordinary comprehension. Martha, though terrified, remained. She described seeing Caesar's eyes shift dark and steady one moment, bright and haunted the next. His hands trembled, but his movements were purposeful, as if conducting the voices, guiding them, shaping them. She recalled thinking, this man holds entire lifetimes within him, entire worlds. Dr. Sutton's earlier observations become critical here. He had theorized that carrying so many identities might eventually overwhelm a human mind. And in that moment, Martha witnessed it happening, yet Caesar did not collapse. He did not succumb. He managed to channel the cacophony into coherent speech. For a moment, it was less a scene of chaos and more a display of incredible control. But the intensity came at a cost. Caesar often emerged from these episodes exhausted, pale, shaking. His mind and body carried the weight of centuries in a way no ordinary human could survive unscathed. And still, he persisted. He persisted because he was a vessel, and because the memories he carried could not vanish. They demanded preservation, even if it meant breaking him in the process. Listeners might sense the eerie beauty of this moment rather than fear. Sound design could layer soft whispers, African-inspired chants, and overlapping English voices, fading in and out, creating the impression that history itself is speaking through him. Shadows dance on the cabin walls, amplifying the surreal, almost magical quality of the scene. The goal isn't terror, it's awe. Awe at the sheer impossible magnitude of Caesar's existence. It's in this crucible of voices that we begin to understand the nature of his burden. He was no longer simply a man. He was a living archive, a repository of the forgotten, the oppressed, the lost, and the wise. Every story, every grief, every joy that would have disappeared into history flowed through him. And on nights like this, you could see it here at the full, unfiltered truth of human memory. And yet, there was a strange grace in it. Despite the strain, Caesar seemed to find a rhythm, a purpose. Each voice, each memory, was not just an echo of the past, it was a warning, a lesson, a celebration. Through him, lives that might have been erased were given a second chance, a voice, a presence. He became a bridge between what was lost and what could still be remembered. In the quiet after the storm of voices, Martha would stay by his side. She described the silence that followed as profound, almost sacred. Caesar would sit, exhausted, yet serene. And in that moment, you could see that the impossible life he carried, the fragmented, unexplainable existence, was not a curse entirely. It was, in its own way, a gift of remembrance, because what we see in Caesar Bowen is more than longevity. It's the embodiment of history, memory, and identity itself. And for those who witness it, even for a brief moment, it changes the way we understand life, time, and the power of stories. This episode, this night, was just one of many. The cabin became a stage where the unexplainable played out again and again, and those who were present could never unhear it, never unsee it. And as the years passed, Whispers of Caesar's abilities spread quietly through the county, leaving a trail of awe and suspicion in equal measure. But as extraordinary as these moments were, they were only the beginning, because even as Caesar gave voice to the past, the question remained: what happens when a vessel has absorbed too much? How long can one man carry the weight of countless lives before the burden becomes unmanageable? And what would historians, neighbors, or even the world discover once they truly examined the truth behind Caesar Bowen's impossible life? There were rare mornings when Caesar seemed almost ordinary. The chaos of voices had subsided, leaving behind a calm, almost fragile man, sitting in the sunlight that filtered through his cabin window. It was in these moments that he spoke directly, and when he did, it carried a weight unlike anything anyone could imagine. "I was chosen to carry forward lives that were erased," he said softly, his voice steady, yet heavy with centuries of grief. "Every slave who died too young, every story that would vanish, I held it. And now, as I release them, I am ceasing to be. And yet, I have preserved their witness." Imagine hearing that. Not just words, but the lived experience of hundreds of lives condensed into a single statement. Each word a testament, each pause a heartbeat of memory. He wasn't speaking metaphorically. In his journals, in his conversations, in the faint tremor of his hands, the truth was clear. Caesar had become more than a man. He was a vessel, a keeper of lost souls. Visuals could show him tracing a finger over the spines of his journals. Sunlight glinting on worn pages, the ink faded from centuries of storytelling. Perhaps a close-up of his eyes, reflecting both sorrow and purpose, as if every life he carried flickered there for a brief instant. He explained that the burden wasn't just about memory, it was about accountability. To remember, he said, is to honor. To witness is to prevent erasure. The world may forget, but I could not. Caesar's dedication was quiet, almost invisible to the casual observer, yet monumental. Every journal he wrote, every story he recounted, was a life saved from total oblivion. Martha Huitt, who often sat beside him during these moments, described how his presence could fill a room with a sense of gravity and solemnity. He wasn't asking for recognition, she said. He simply knew he had work to do, and he did it, no matter the cost. Even the physical toll was evident. His hands bore the marks of decades of labor writing, tending to his cabin, living through centuries of emotional strain. His eyes sometimes flickered with the exhaustion of carrying too many memories, yet he persisted. The sunlight would fall across his face, highlighting the lines of time and experience etched into his skin, a silent testimony to the impossible lifespan he endured. But in these moments, there was also something profoundly human. Caesar smiled rarely, and when he did, it was not just relief, it was connection. He was sharing the weight of memory with someone willing to listen, acknowledging that, for all his extraordinary existence, he still sought understanding, empathy, and companionship. By allowing a glimpse into his thoughts, he offered the world a lesson. The preservation of memory, even at great personal cost, is a sacred duty. Through him, the lives that would have been lost found continuity. Through him, the silenced finally had a voice. And so, in the golden light of that quiet cabin, Caesar Bowen became more than an enigma of age or folklore. He became a bridge between history and humanity, a living witness to the stories the world might have chosen to forget. And for anyone who witnessed him in these rare, luminous moments, it was clear this man, burdened and extraordinary, was carrying the weight of centuries, not for fame, not for recognition, but for the simple, profound purpose of remembering. By May of 1888, Caesar Bowen had lived through more than any ordinary person could imagine. His cabin, perched quietly at the edge of Greene County, Ohio, seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of his final moments. The oak tree outside, gnarled and ancient like Caesar himself, cast dappled sunlight across the worn floorboards. He spent these last hours simply observing the world. Clouds drifted lazily across the sky. Birds sang melodies no one else could recall. And for a brief moment, the weight of centuries lifted from his shoulders. No voices overlapped. No memories demanded release, just a man breathing in the calm of a spring afternoon. Dr. Sutton, who had documented Caesar's life with both fascination and skepticism, sat quietly nearby. Even he could not deny the extraordinary journey he had witnessed. Fletcher, the local historian, leaned against the doorway, notebook abandoned, overwhelmed by the quiet dignity of the scene. Martha Huitt, who had been a constant companion, knelt beside him, whispering comforts that transcended time. And Samuel Pritchard, once a skeptic, now stared in awe, realizing that the truth of Caesar's life far exceeded any story he could have imagined. At 2:47 p.m., Caesar Bowen breathed his last. There was no fanfare, no proclamation, no shock, just the stillness of a life completed, a burden lifted, and the quiet reverence of those who had stood witness. Yet in death, he left behind something far greater than memory alone, a gift to the world that had overlooked so many lives. Inside his cabin, neatly stacked and meticulously catalogued, were 63 journals. Each one bore the weight of countless stories, the joys, the sorrows, the dreams, and the resilience of people who had lived, loved, suffered, and been erased by history. In his careful handwriting, sometimes 3 distinct styles within a single page, he preserved voices that would otherwise have been silenced forever. Martha Huitt described running her fingers across the faded pages, feeling as if each story were whispering to her directly. Fletcher noted the remarkable consistency and detail, as though Caesar had not just remembered, but experienced each life fully. Dr. Sutton, whose scientific mind struggled to comprehend what he saw, finally admitted, "I can neither explain nor fully measure what Caesar Bowen carried, but I can testify that it was real. Even in his death, Caesar's purpose endured. He had been more than a man. He had been a vessel of remembrance, a guardian of forgotten histories." And as the sun slanted through the oak leaves, casting long shadows across the cabin floor, the world seemed to pause, honoring the quiet hero who had carried humanity's unspoken stories for more than a century. And so, under that oak tree, surrounded by those who loved and marveled at him, Caesar Bowen's life came to an end. Yet in the voices preserved within those 63 journals, in the memories of Dr. Sutton, Martha Huitt, Fletcher, and Samuel Pritchard, and in the stories we remember today, he continues to speak. The impossible lifespan, the unbearable burden, and the extraordinary compassion of one man, these are his legacy. And through them, Caesar Bowen, the man who became more than time itself, lives on *** after Caesar Bowen's death. The true scope of his contribution only began to emerge. Dr. Sutton, who had been documenting Caesar's life for decades, dedicated the next 15 years to verifying the 63 journals left behind. Every name Caesar mentioned, the neighbors, the distant relatives, the forgotten figures of Ohio and the South, was confirmed. Every event, from the smallest domestic detail to large historical occurrences, matched documented records. Historians around the country began to take notice. Dr. Patricia Morrison, a leading historian on African American history, noted that Caesar's journals were more than memoirs, they are living archives of human endurance. During the civil rights movement, these journals inspired renewed scholarship, proving that the stories of enslaved people, often erased from history, could be preserved with incredible fidelity. Modern researchers marveled at the level of detail. Dr. Sutton wrote, "I have never encountered anything like it. Caesar Bowen remembered what should have been forgotten, and he remembered it with perfect clarity. DNA analysis of preserved hair samples from Caesar's belongings even suggested unusual cellular longevity, though science still struggles to explain it. The physiological mystery only reinforced the extraordinary nature of the man." Quotes from contemporary historians underline the journal's importance. Dr. Morrison said, "Caesar Bowen's writings allow us to walk alongside lives that history tried to erase. He became the bridge between centuries." Another historian, Samuel Caldwell, remarked, "It is almost impossible to overstate the value of these journals. They are a testament to memory, resilience, and the human spirit. Even today, scholars revisit Caesar's journals to extract details about daily life, social structures, and personal experiences that would otherwise be lost. Museums and archives across the country now preserve copies, ensuring that Caesar's witness is not forgotten. His legacy extends beyond the impossible span of his life. It lies in the voices he safeguarded, the truths he preserved, and the lessons we continue to learn from him." In verifying Caesar Bowen's accounts, historians uncovered a rare phenomenon, memory as a vessel, history as lived experience, and human endurance as something that could, in a sense, defy time itself. And while science and skepticism will always linger, the evidence is clear. Caesar Bowen existed, he remembered, and he gave the world something far greater than himself, the voices of those who could no longer speak. So, what do we take from Caesar Bowen? Not just the impossibility of living 126 years, but the extraordinary commitment to remembering, to honoring the lives that history tried to erase. Think about it for a moment. Every injustice, every unspoken story, every forgotten soul that Caesar carried within him, he made sure they were not lost. Some mysteries, perhaps, will never be fully solved. How could one man witness so much and survive it all? How could memory stretch the limits of the human body? Some lives, some experiences, may never be entirely understood. And yet, the power of Caesar's story isn't just in the unexplainable, it's in what he did with it. The act of witnessing, of preserving truth, of carrying forward stories that could have vanished. That is a power no one can take away. Caesar Bowen reminds us that history is not only about dates and events. It's about the lives, the voices, and the experiences of those who lived them. And sometimes, the greatest legacy isn't in what we achieve, but in what we choose to remember and pass on. Every journal, every voice he preserved, every memory he carried forward. That was his gift to the world. As you reflect on Caesar's life, consider this. How many stories around you are fading, unspoken, or ignored? What truths might you preserve, if only you chose to listen? The world may try to forget, but there will always be those who remember, who honor, who bear witness. That is the true measure of immortality. If you want more stories that blur the line between history and mystery, stories that make you question the limits of life and memory, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. And never forget, some lives are worth remembering, even when the world tries to forget them.